The subject is the future of al-Qaeda. Both Lawrence Wright and I wrote pieces recently indicating that al-Qaeda is internally split, or there is an emerging jihadist critique of al-Qaeda. Now, that emerging jihadist critique has actually been around for some period of time, but it's been amplified as of late. Now, there are basically four strategic weaknesses that al-Qaeda has. First of all, it kills a lot of Muslim civilians. Muslims around the world are beginning to notice this, whether it's in Iraq or Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, anywhere where the bombs have gone off. It doesn't really, it's human nature to really look at a problem as being somebody else's problem when it happens on their, when it's not on your own doorstep. It took 9/11, arguably, for the United States to wake up to this problem. And when bombs started going off in Riyadh, when bombs started going off in Anbar province, when bombs started going off in Amman, Jordan, when bombs started going off in Jakarta, Muslim civilians started paying attention. So first strategic weakness, they're killing a lot of Muslim civilians. Second, they're not offering a positive vision of the future. We know what they're against, but what are they really for? If bin Laden was here and you asked him if he was a witness, what are you trying to do? He would say the restoration of the caliphate. Now, in practice, I don't think Larry Wright or I would be opposed to the restoration of the caliphate as it's understood by most Muslims, which is meaning something like the Ottoman Empire, a relatively rational group of people that treated minorities fairly well. But what does bin Laden mean by the restoration of the caliphate? He means Taliban-style theocracies from Indonesia to Morocco. And most Muslims don't. They've already seen what the Taliban did in Afghanistan. They've seen Iran under the Ayatollahs. They've seen Sudan under Turabi. They know what that looks like. The third strategic weakness is that they've made a world of enemies. This is not really a winning strategy. I can't think of a category of institution, person, or government that al-Qaeda hasn't said they're against, whether it's Westerners, Muslims who don't precisely share their views, Jews, the UN, the international media, the list goes on and on. And finally, it's very difficult, because of their ideological views, it's very hard for al-Qaeda or its affiliates, or almost impossible for them to turn themselves into real political movements, because they can't make the kind of real-world political compromises that actually allows you to engage in the kind of compromises that really politics is all about. So given these four strategic problems, which any one of these would be very, very difficult for any movement to deal with, the long-term prognosis for al-Qaeda is incredibly poor. However, Chairwoman Harman mentioned the NIE. Now, how do we square the fact that there is this emerging jihadi critique, not from moderate, quote unquote, Muslims, who after all aren't going to be very persuasive for the people who are attempted to join al-Qaeda, but from within the ranks of the people who are the ideological godfathers of al-Qaeda, from within the ranks of people who fought with bin Laden? They're the people who are publicly criticizing al-Qaeda now. How do you square the fact that they're losing this long-term ideological battle with the NIE that says al-Qaeda is resurging on the Afghan-Pakistan border? And I think both things are true. These are not either-or categories. They're losing the longer-term ideological battle, but along the Afghan-Pakistan border, they are regrouping from a military point of view as a terrorist organization and also as an insurgent organization. And just to give you 7 quick pieces of evidence for that in the 2 minutes I have left, the London attack of July 7th, 2005 was an al-Qaeda-directed operation. The planes plot of the summer of 2006, where 1,500 Americans, Canadians, and Britons would have been blown up in 7 planes, was an al-Qaeda-directed operation. What is going on in Afghanistan is, to some degree, al-Qaeda's responsibility, because the Taliban at its higher levels has adopted al-Qaeda's ideology and tactics wholesale. Fourth, obviously, al-Qaeda in Iraq is taking some hits, but it would be it would be premature to declare them dead as a terrorist organization, as an insurgent organization that holds territory. They continue to, they're out of business. But as a terrorist organization, and we just saw yesterday with the 3 female suicide attackers, they can continue to be an important spoiler in Iraq for the foreseeable future. Obviously, what's going on in Pakistan? Pakistan had more suicide attacks in 2007 than in its collective previous history. And then also we're seeing, obviously, the fact that bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri are still out there, still able to produce tapes. And I'll make one prediction, that bin Laden, unable to attack the United States, at least in the short or medium term, will come out with a videotape in the run-up to this election in which he will say, it doesn't matter if you elect McCain or Obama, you, the American people, need to change the American government policies all around the Muslim world. I think we can almost guarantee that he will produce that kind of tape. By the way, that produces a rather strong opportunity for the United States, because the tape is traceable after all. There is a chain of custody of people who courier the tape out to an internet website. There are also people who film this. But anyway, that is a snapshot, I think, of al-Qaeda's continued resurgence as a military and a terrorist and insurgent organization. But in the long term, they're losing this ideological struggle. And I think, parenthetically, I think their ability to attack the United States directly in the next 5 years is extremely low.
Thank you very much for that interesting and very concise testimony. Mr. Wright, you're recognized to summarize your testimony in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Peter. Al-Qaeda's violent philosophy has proved to be a powerful lure to alienated young Muslims all over the world. Much of that philosophy was formulated by Syed Imam al-Sharif, also known as Dr. Fadl. He was the emir of the Egyptian terror organization created by Ayman al-Zawahiri called Al-Jihad. In 1988, Zawahiri and Dr. Fadl joined with Osama bin Laden to create Al-Qaeda. Two of Dr. Fadl's books form the core of Al-Qaeda's ideology and were used to indoctrinate new recruits. Dr. Fadl was arrested in Yemen shortly after 9/11 and eventually restored to Egyptian custody. In November 2007, Dr. Fadl published a manifesto that dramatically reverses his previous views, despite the fact that Dr. Fadl is writing from an Egyptian prison. His new work has created a philosophical earthquake inside radical Islam. Zawahiri has repeatedly addressed the challenge that Dr. Fadl poses in videos, in a question and answer session on the internet with Muslims, and in a 200-page book directly addressing this particular controversy. It's clear that Al-Qaeda views this revisionist thinking with great alarm. This August marks the 20th anniversary of Al-Qaeda's founding. That's a long time for a terror organization to exist. But Al-Qaeda shows no signs of disappearing anytime soon. Most terror organizations end with the death of their charismatic leader, the elimination of their sanctuaries, or a change in the political, economic, and social conditions that gave rise to it. Unfortunately, the leaders of Al-Qaeda continue to exist and to operate inside secure sanctuaries, and the socioeconomic conditions in the Muslim world show little signs of progress. The philosophical challenge to Al-Qaeda within its own ranks will have a limited but still important effect on the group's ability to recruit new members to its ranks. American policymakers can take advantage of this period of uncertainty within radical Islam to wage a vigorous diplomatic campaign directed toward ending the polarization between the West and the Muslim world that Al-Qaeda has sought to create. Nothing would do more to reduce anti-Americanism in the Middle East than fair and forceful diplomatic efforts to end the festering crises in Israel and Palestine, and also in Kashmir, which is central to stabilizing Pakistan and getting its leaders fully committed to addressing the radical threat in their own country. American intelligence continues to be handicapped by the security restrictions that obstruct the hiring of citizens who natively speak the languages needed to understand, much less penetrate or disrupt Al-Qaeda. As an example, let's take the FBI, an organization that made its reputation fighting against the mafia and to some extent the IRA. Who succeeded in doing that? Irish and Italian guys. It's not a joke that many people in our intelligence community can't pronounce the names of the people they're struggling to fight against. Until we have people who natively speak and understand the languages and cultures that we're fighting against, we will always be deaf and dumb in this struggle. Al-Qaeda has created a compelling narrative about America's role in the world and especially in the Middle East. Untold thousands of Muslims endorse that narrative whether they join Al-Qaeda or not. As Al-Qaeda's violent philosophy has become vulnerable to the reconsiderations within the radical Islamic movement, this is a propitious moment to change that narrative through creative, vigorous, assertive diplomacy and more informed intelligence gathering. As Michael Leader, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, recently pointed out, it is Al-Qaeda, not the West, that is truly at war with Islam. If Muslims came to believe that, then the war on terror would quickly end. Thank you, Madam Chair.